So you know the names that everyone knows in Greek mythology, right? Zeus, up on Olympus, the king, Hera, keeping a watchful eye, Poseidon, ruling the vast seas. Their stories, they really dominate, don't they?
They really do. They're the headliners, the ones everyone thinks of first.
Yeah.
The Olympians, they represent this, certain kind of divine order involved in human affairs, all that drama.
Yeah, they shape how most of us understand the whole pantheon. But what if that picture, the one we all know, is actually just like a small corner, part of something way bigger, way more complex? What if the ancient Greeks saw this divine world just teeming with other entities? Primordial forces, strange spirits, beings tied right into nature itself. Beings whose existence was fundamental, even if we don't hear their stories as much today.
Exactly. And that's precisely the world your sources open up for us. They kind of pull back the curtain on what we can call the unseen pantheon, suggesting this far richer tapestry woven with, forgotten gods, ethereal nymphs, wild satyrs, figures who shape the world in ways we rarely talk about.
Right, the unseen pantheon. I like that term. Yeah. So our mission for this deep dive, using the sources you've brought, is to journey beyond those shining, familiar halls of Olympus. We want to try and uncover these figures, explore maybe why their tales faded a bit, what secrets they might hold about how the ancients saw the world, and how their influence might still be felt, even subtly.
Sounds like a great exploration. Let's dive in and see what these sources really reveal about those deeper layers of Greek belief.
Okay, so to really get this, we probably need to go right back, way back. Before the Titans, even before the Olympians were a thing. What do the sources tell us about those absolute foundational elements, these primordial deities, the protogenoi?
Right, the protogenoi. These are the most ancient beings imaginable, basically emerging fully formed right out of chaos itself. And the key thing to grasp, I think, is that they're less like gods who rule over something and more like the very embodiment of those things. Earth, air, sea, sky, darkness, night, light, day, even concepts like procreation and time. They are the foundational reality.
Wow. Not just rulers, but the actual essence.
Yeah, the essence. That's a good way to put it. A powerful distinction.
It really is. And one of the most striking figures from that primordial time, based on the sources, has to be Nyx.
Ah, Nyx. Yes. The primordial goddess of night. Born straight from chaos. And her dark veil, it wasn't just, nighttime. It was a fundamental state covering the world. What's really fascinating is the sheer depth of her ancient authority.
How so?
Well, the sources indicate that even Zeus, king of the Olympians, this powerhouse figure, even he respected her, sometimes yielded to her ancient power.
Even Zeus? Seriously, that really says something about her status.
Absolutely. Her seniority, her fundamental nature, it gave her immense sway.
Yeah.
And think about her children, Hypnos, who is sleep itself, and Thanatos, death.
Powerful figures.
Immensely powerful. They're just ideas. They're entities who travel across the ultimate boundary, the one between life and death. Nyx herself really embodies that deep mystery, the unsettling beauty maybe, and the undeniable power of darkness and the unknown.
Okay, so we have these vast fundamental forces. Now, if we move just a little bit forward, maybe, still in these realms of power that feel a bit shadowy on the edges, who is Hecate? The sources seem to paint a really complex picture.
Oh, Hecate is absolutely one of the most compelling and, complex figures in this unseen pantheon. She's this enigmatic goddess of magic, witchcraft, crossroads, ghosts. Her nature is just deeply liminal.
Liminal meaning?
Meaning she exists on the boundaries, the threshold. She presides over transitions, places where different worlds or states of being meet. Like crossroads.
Okay. And how is she usually shown? I feel like I've seen different images.
Yes, you probably have. The sources show variations. Often she's depicted as triple-faced or looking in 3 directions at once. That probably symbolizes her connection to crossroads, maybe the 3 realms, heaven, earth, underworld, that some sources say she influences.
3 directions. Makes sense for Crossroads.
Exactly. Other times you see her with twin torches, like she's guiding the way through the dark. And sometimes she's even dressed a bit like Artemis in a maiden skirt and hunting boots.
Interesting. And her origins are a bit murky, right? Different stories floating around.
Totally. Yeah, the sources kind of disagree. Some link her to Nyx or even Zeus and Asteria. But the lineage mentioned most often seems to be Perseus and Asteria.
Okay.
And what's really significant about that particular origin story is that she supposedly received power over heaven, earth, and the sea from her parents. And she kept that power, even after Zeus and the Olympians took charge.
Whoa, okay, so she retained power across all those realms. That's unusual.
It's very unusual for a deity often primarily linked with the underworld or magic. It gives her this cosmic reach.
So she has this huge domain, but she's also really tied to these specific liminal spaces.
Yeah.
The boundaries.
That's the paradox, yeah. She holds sway over those boundaries between living and dead, known paths and hidden ones. She's seen as a guardian of secrets, a guide through mysteries, especially active at night. You feel her influence in moonlit rituals, those critical choices you make at a metaphorical crossroads. And even in that shiver, you get thinking about ghosts.
Her role in the search for Persephone seems really key here, too.
It absolutely is. It cements her connection to the underworld. The story goes she helped Demeter search, guiding her with those flaming torches through the night.
Right, I remember that.
And then, once Persephone was found, Hecate became her minister, her companion down in Hades. So that really establishes her as a deity of the lower world, ruling over souls, overseeing purifications and things like that.
It doesn't sound like she was exactly a comforting presence, though.
No. Far from it, often. She's frequently described with Stygian dogs.
Dogs.
Yeah, hellhounds, basically. Seen as this spectral being who sends out demons or phantoms. She dwells at crossroads, tombs, places linked with death or spilled blood. Some accounts say her approach was heralded by the howling of dogs. Definitely not the goddess of cozy firesides, in that aspect at least.
Yikes. But despite all that darkness, she wasn't just some fringe figure pushed to the side, was she? She was actually honored by the Olympians, even fought with them.
Yes, exactly. And this highlights her ancient power and, frankly, her strategic importance. The sources mention her being honored by the immortal gods, and crucially, she sided with Zeus in the war against the Titans, the Titanomachy.
Really?
Yeah. And as a reward, she received a share of the earth and the unfruitful sea, a pretty significant domain for someone not usually on the main Olympian roster. She also helped the gods again in the Gigantomachy, the war against the giants, apparently slaying the giant Claudius with fire. So she was clearly a formidable, respected power.
Wow. And some of the details are just weirdly specific and fascinating, like the animal familiars.
Aren't they? These transformation stories, like the Trojan queen Hecuba being turned into her black sea dog, or a midwife named Galinthias becoming a polecat. It adds this whole other layer of mystique, connecting her to folklore, magic, shape-shifting, really rich stuff.
And people actually worshipped her quite widely.
Oh, very much so. We find evidence of her worship in places like Samothrace, Aegina, Argos, Athens. These statues, called Hecateia, often triple-formed, were set up outside houses or at crossroads. Sometimes people even consulted them as oracles. And there's this poignant detail about offerings left at crossroads every month, food that was often eaten by the poor. It was called Hecate's Supper. Sacrifices could include dogs, honey, black female lambs, specific things for a specific powerful deity.
Her name, Hecate, meaning worker from afar, and how she gets identified with Artemis or Selene sometimes. It just shows how complex and woven into the fabric she was.
She really is a deity of paradoxes. Ancient power, liminal spells, magic, the underworld, yet allied with the Olympians. It's this complexity, I think, that might be one reason her stories aren't easily simplified, maybe contributing to why she's less famous today.
Okay, moving slightly away from those really ancient veiled powers, but still thinking about forces outside that strict Olympian control. The sources mention Tyche.
Tyche, goddess of fortune, chance, luck, destiny. She's crucial because she reminds us that the ancient Greek worldview wasn't all neat plans laid out by Zeus or the fates. Tyche is the wild card, pure, unpredictable chance.
She sounds capricious, like really unpredictable.
Exactly that. She's often shown holding the rudder of fate or sometimes standing on a wheel that's constantly turning. She can bring amazing prosperity one minute and total despair the next. Unexpectedly.
So different from the fates who sort of weave things methodically.
Very different. The fates have a process. Tyche is just, bam, random chance, good or bad. And people clearly felt her power. Her shrines were everywhere, in basically every city. It reflects that constant human hope for good luck and the fear of sudden disaster.
Makes sense. Now what about Phoebe? She's a Titan, right? So older than the Olympians as rulers, but not quite primordial like Nyx.
Right. Phoebe's one of the original Titans. She's strongly linked to the moon and also to prophetic dreams. What makes her particularly significant, apart from her own ancient power, is her family connection. She's the grandmother of Apollo and Artemis.
Wow, that's quite a legacy.
It really is. Her ancient wisdom, her connection to oracles and prophecy was apparently immense, even if her Olympian grandkids get more press. Her name actually means bright, but her influence was felt more in that mysterious realm of visions, the subconscious, foretelling things. She's another layer of these powerful ancient beings who came before, influenced the Olympians, but whose own stories maybe aren't always front and center.
Okay, so these figures we've talked about, Nyx, Hecate, Tyche, Phoebe, they represent these really ancient forces, fundamental concepts, stuff that shaped the cosmos before the Olympians really took charge, but also continued to exert influence alongside them.
Precisely. Their power isn't really about ruling like Zeus rules from a throne. It's more about being. They embody fundamental aspects of existence itself: night, fate, magic, prophecy, the structure of the cosmos. They're like the deep background hum of reality, the whispers you might not always notice behind the louder Olympian dramas.
Right. Okay, so from that vastness, the cosmos, the shadows, fate, let's shift focus a bit down to the natural world itself, the whispering wilds, as you called it, because here we find a whole different host of spirits, right? Also vital to how the Greeks saw the landscape.
Yes, absolutely. This is where we meet the nymphs, and they are incredibly diverse, often overlooked maybe, but they're nature spirits intimately tied to specific places: forests, rivers, mountains, the sea, sometimes even one particular tree.
And they're generally seen as beautiful.
Immortal.
Usually
That's
beautiful.
a guess.
And immortal in the sense they live for a very long time, but perhaps not eternally unchanging like the major gods, especially since their existence was often deeply linked to their natural future.
You mentioned different kinds.
Loads of different kinds. Dryads were nymphs of trees, Naiads were freshwater nymphs, springs, rivers. Oreads belonged to mountains, oceanids to the sea. Each group had its own unique characteristics, powers, stories, all deeply connected to their environment.
That idea of the Dryads being linked to their trees, that feels really powerful. It really is. Some sources say, flat out, if a Dryad's tree died, she died too. That's profound, isn't it? It highlights this deep reverence the ancient Greeks seem to have had for nature, seeing it as interconnected, alive. Or think about the Naiads. The purity of their spring or river was crucial. They were revered as sources of life, healing. These weren't just background figures. They were seen as vital to the health and spirit of the place itself.
So definitely not just like pretty decorations in the landscape. They were active forces.
Exactly. Now, they did sometimes serve bigger gods. You hear about nymphs attending Artemis on the hunt or Poseidon in the sea. But they also had their own lives, their own social structures, alliances, even rivalries. And they weren't always sweet and benevolent. No, they could be dangerous if you disrespected their domain. They might lure travelers astray, lead them to their doom. There was even a belief they could cause a kind of madness, nympholepsy, especially if disturbed around midday.
Nympholepsy.
Ah.
Wow, that gives them a real edge. So how did people interact with them? How did they worship them?
Well, their origins vary in the myths, sometimes daughters of Zeus, or the earth goddess Hecate, or sometimes specific local river gods. Their worship is interesting, too, and might hint at why they're less prominent now. Archaeology suggests their cults often started with, well, the rural poor. People deeply dependent on specific springs or groves. Early offerings might have even been animal sacrifices.
Huh. Like goats or sheep.
Yeah, boar, goat, sheep, often before a communal meal near the sacred spot. But over time, that shifted. We see bloodless offerings become more common, like leaving coins in fountains, which is something we still vaguely recognize today.
And eventually the elites got interested too.
Yes, later on you see growing elite interest. This led to building these elaborate public fountains called nymphaea, especially in cities, highly decorated structures, and they became important civic spots, even used for things like wedding rituals in Athens. The nymphae there was where marriages were held, and brides would offer vases.
So they went from rural springs to city rituals. That's quite a journey.
It is. It shows how integrated they were. But maybe that very localized nature of the spring, that grove, meant their stories didn't quite merge into the big pan-Hellenic narratives the way the Olympian myths did. Could be another reason they seem a bit more obscure to us.
Okay, that makes sense. And then we have the satyrs. Or fauns, if you're thinking Roman. The really wild ones.
Oh yeah, the satyrs. They embody the raw, untamed, often chaotic energy of the wilderness. You usually find them associated with Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, revelry.
And they look part human, part goat.
Typically, yeah. Human-like upple bodies, but often with goat legs, horns, sometimes tails. Instantly recognizable as something wild.
They seem to represent just primal urges.
They absolutely do. Primal desires, music, dance, completely uninhibited freedom. They're often mischievous, definitely lustful, sometimes even a bit dangerous. They're connected to that joyous, intoxicating, but also untamed spirit of nature.
Is there one satyr who's particularly famous?
Probably Silenus. He's often depicted as older, maybe a bit paunchy, usually drunk. But he was also the tutor and companion of Dionysus.
The tutor. Even though he was wild.
Exactly. That's the fascinating duality. Despite the wildness and the drinking, Silenus was said to possess deep philosophical wisdom, even prophetic abilities. But usually only when you could get him sober, which wasn't easy. It hints at this idea of profound insight found not in civilization, but in raw, untamed nature, in instinct.
Interesting. So the nymphs and satyrs together, they really show a different kind of divinity compared to the big cosmic gods or the Olympians ruling from on high. They're like the living spirit of the landscape.
That's a perfect way to put it. They show us that the ancient Greek worldview saw divinity everywhere, not just on a mountaintop, but in every rustling leaf, every bubbling spring, every echoing cave. They embodied the animating spirit, the raw, sometimes dangerous magic infused in the world around them. Their stories, they give us a window into this really profound connection people felt with a living earth, a world where nature wasn't just scenery, it was alive with divine energy.
It's so clear these figures were important, deeply woven into ancient life, tied to the environment, even cosmic forces in some cases. So why? Why aren't they household names like Zeus or Hera today?
Yeah, it's a great question. And as we've kind of touched on, the sources might suggest a few reasons. Perhaps that very localized nature we talked about with the nymphs, maybe worship tied to the spring or that grove just didn't spread universally like the state-sponsored cults of the Olympians.
Okay, that makes sense. Less centralized.
Right. Or maybe their powers were just more nuanced, sometimes unsettling. Hecate's magic, the potential danger from nymphs, the wildness of satyrs. Maybe these didn't fit as neatly into the simpler, more, let's say, heroic or morality-focused stories that tended to get preserved and passed down through later cultures. Their complexity, their connection to primal forces might have made them harder to package, maybe, contributing to them fading a bit from the mainstream view.
Yet, the ideas behind them feel like they've subtly lingered, haven't they?
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. The whole concept of nature spirits, of trees having souls, of certain places holding a special energy, that resonates directly with the ancient belief in nymphs and dryads. It speaks to a kind of reverence for the environment that feels both incredibly ancient and surprisingly relevant today.
Yeah, definitely. And that archetype of the wild, hedonistic creature you see in folklore or fantasy, that owes a huge debt to the satyr, doesn't it?
It really does. Satyrs represent those primal, untamed parts of existence, the bits that maybe civilization tries to smooth over or suppress. They're a reminder of the wildness that's inherent in nature and maybe within ourselves, too.
So exploring these less-known deities and spirits, it really challenges our standard picture of Greek mythology, doesn't it? Makes it much bigger.
It truly does. It reveals a pantheon that's way more intricate, more expansive than just the 12 Olympians we usually learn about. The ancient Greek world, according to these sources, wasn't just ruled from a single mountain. It was teeming with powerful forces, often mysterious ones, that governed not just human lives, but the very breath and essence of the natural world. They were like the silent witnesses, the unseen hands shaping the landscapes, the voices in the wind and the water.
And their stories, even the fragmented ones we have, they offer some really profound insights, I think.
Yes. They remind us about the sacredness that ancient cultures often saw in nature. They highlight the unpredictable dance of fate and chance, like with Tyche. They underscore the enduring power of those elemental primal forces, darkness, magic, wildness. They kind of urge us, maybe, to look beyond the obvious, to listen more closely to the whispers, to seek out the magic that might still be hidden in plain sight just off the main roads of Olympus. Greek mythology, seen through this wider lens, it becomes so much more than just tales of gods and heroes. It's really a window into an ancient world where it seems every corner could hold a deity and every shadow a secret.
So these figures we've explored today, the ancient primordials like Nyx, the veiled ones like Hecate, the nature spirits, nymphs, and satyrs, they're not really forgotten, are they? Not truly gone.
I don't think so. In a way, they're the heartbeat of a richer, deeper, more mystical Greek mythology. They embody those raw forces of creation, the subtle energies pulsing through the natural world, that unyielding spirit of primal existence. Their absence from the absolute mainstream just makes rediscovering them through sources like these feel even more rewarding. It reveals a pantheon that's incredibly deep, complex, and intimately connected to the world itself.
And it really leaves you with something to chew on, doesn't it? How did that ancient Greek way of seeing divinity everywhere, in every tree, every spring, every crossroads, in darkness itself? How does that contrast with how many of us in modern cultures view the divine, or even just the world around us?
It's a fascinating contrast, isn't it?
Yeah. What does that difference really tell us about their perspective versus our own?
A lot to think about. Which of these lesser-known figures maybe resonated most with you? What surprised you most digging into this unseen?